Every now and then, whenever a character that has monstrous features makes an impression, we tend to compare them to the One Punch Man monsters. The reason is obviously just to understand how strong and how dangerous they would be in the One Punch Man verse, simply to determine which threat level the Hero Association would give them. This time, our character is Dabura Karabe, the primary antagonist of the Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo series. Due to how insanely good Modulo is and how popular this character got, we tried to analyze his strength, character, and abilities to see where he would be stopping in the One Punch Man verse. In terms of lore, you can even say he's an alien who, instead of ending up in the Jujutsu Kaisen planet, he actually goes to the One Punch Man Earth. But nonetheless, how would he do and where does he eventually stop? Dabura Karabe is hands down my favorite character in Jujutsu Kaisen, hyped up from second chapter to being a threat on the level of Ryoma and Sukuna, a calamity that required the force of multiple high-tier sorcerers to defeat. Now, whether that's true or not, I'm not here to support any agenda from either side, but the reading comprehension tells you that this statement is thrown for a reason. Any character that has any type of lore of being the strongest and never ever having the needs to try against anyone should at least be put on the Honored One pedestal, a tier that only Sukuna and Gojo inhabit, which would automatically put him at a tier of power way above anything we've seen in the story so far, other than possibly domain expansions, since till now 20 chapters in, he just doesn't seem to have one. Now, we've read Dabura's story, we've seen multiple interactions, but really the only time we've seen how strong he is or could be is against Makura or Mahoraga, and in this fight, I believe we're really seeing a lot of feats that are day and nights compared to what we've seen in the original series. The biggest contention in the Jujutsu Kaisen community when it comes to adverse scaling certainly lies in the speed department. We do have issues when it comes to attack potency, durability, and destructive capacity, but how many times have you heard that JJK caps at Mach 3? This is all due to Cursed Naoya and Maki's interaction. Things like that didn't or still doesn't land well, as people would argue that Hakari and Maki has been seen reacting to lightning, and the most infamous one, which is Kashimo's electromagnetic waves that were dodged by Sukuna himself. However, Modulo has finally introduced the concept of the speed of light narratively in the story, and people do not seem to distinguish between comparing what the narrative implicates and real-life science and physics. This new curse technique of Dabura on a narrative standpoint is regarded as something insane. It introduced the idea that if one ever wanted to approach these levels in the verse, there will be physical consequences. Their bodies would simply not withstand that fraction, as seen when Dabura's leg was severely injured from that one single lightspeed attack, so much so that he thought of cutting it out. The point is, the verse narratively speaking went from Mach 3 to sublight speed, and it doesn't mean that every character is now upscaled, it just means that Dabura is regarded as a monster that is doing something completely OP in the JJK verse. So the concept of light speed for now can only be talked about or mentioned when Dabura is in the conversation until further notice. Remember that this video is made with having 20 released chapters, and maybe there will be a statement that suggests Yuji, Gojo, and Sukuna can replicate these levels of speed. Now, when it comes to attack potency and destructive capabilities, before talking about Dabura himself, we really need to mention the insane feats performed in the anime, specifically in episode 4 of season 3. Now, as Zenrin, just from running, is able to destroy multiple plateaus, putting him at small town range of attack potency. And the one that I've been hearing these days is that Maki's punch cleared the clouds, which would make her country level. You see, for starters, anime in general isn't a good reference for power scaling, as in 99% of times, the studio, the director, and the animators are taking creative liberties to make things look cooler for the audience. Sometimes they even mess up with the narrative in a funny way, as Yuji is seen eating a protein bar and walking casually when he knows he's being chased by a Gojo level character. The point is, unless the author himself influenced that decision, anime should not be used when the manga that is worked on by the maker of the story exists. And so, how do we derive how strong Dabura is? You see, we have two feats from the Modulo manga that should give us an idea. Dabura's lightspeed kick and Yuji's dismantle. I would even go on to say that Dabura is one of, if not the most destructive character we've seen on screen without a domain expansion or a binding vow. So realistically speaking, for now, granting him anything above city level which would equal a domain amped divine flames output from Sukuna would be very shaky. As a matter of fact, the story itself reinforces the idea of characters even when reaching the threat level of Sukuna can still be taken down by a nuke. It's really the only option they always resort to. You can also use the fact that Gojo was stated to be incapable of powering up an entire nation with his curse energy. Although this has many problems and different interpretations concerning the time span and the stamina required for that set user, multiple calcs has been made with conclusions that varies from city to outright island level of energy outputs. And since Dabura is someone who should be in that honored 1 level of strength, he should be as strong as this if not higher. So to sum everything up, Dabura would be city to island level with sub 2 relativistic speeds, and possibly straight up faster than light attacks with his light technique. As him not being able to reach light speed movements doesn't mean his light attacks aren't already operating on that level. Dabura also has access to reverse curse technique that allows him to regenerate, and in chapter 20 we're introduced to this dark technique that I'm assuming would be something that has to do with gravity. And with all of this being said, can Dabura handle the One Punch Man monsters? We've talked about the One Punch Man monsters so many times on this channel, breaking down how strong each threat level really is and comparing them to different characters. But for today's video, I think it's safe to skip past Tiger level threats entirely, as the story itself really lives and breathes at the Demon and Dragon levels anyway. And so, when it comes to Demon level monsters, a great place to start would be Genos, as back in chapter 9, he casually blasted a hole straight through a mountain. This feat alone puts his destructive capabilities somewhere between town and large town level. And believe it or not, this version of Genos is actually the weakest we've ever seen, since right after that he gets an upgrade that boosts his firepower even further, but he still couldn't one-shot the Deep Sea King even when putting serious force behind his attack. The Deep Sea King took those hits and kept on fighting, which firmly places him in the large town to small city range in terms of both attack potency and durability. Genos after gets another upgrade, one that finally lets him defeat the Deep Sea King with an attack that previously couldn't put him down. But even then, he still struggles against G4 and cannot destroy his core even with a concentrated explosion. Fast forward through 2 more upgrades and he's fighting Garu, who implies he could take down Genos if he wasn't injured and poisoned. This is worth noting because just shortly after, monsters like Roy Ripper and Bug God are giving Garu serious trouble. And so the point I'm trying to establish here is that based on the various power-ups and the clear tier differences even within the demon level category, it's reasonable to say that demon level monsters range from town level to city level combatants. This is obviously assuming we ignore Murata's statement about Genos being capable of destroying a mountain. When it comes to dragon level monsters, their power varies drastically from one to another. Take Vaccine Man for example, he casually tanks an attack calculated around 87 megatons of TNT, which already places him at city plus level. And according to the data book, his second form drastically increases his fighting strength. Depending on how one interprets drastically, this could mean anything from a simple 2 times increase, which would still be a massive lowball, to an outright one-shot tier above his base form. And either way, this would place him at bare minimum mountain level. Characters who scale to Carnage Kabuto on the other hand should at the very least fall into the large island level range, as Kabuto was able to contend with Darkshine for a full 15 minutes, which is a very significant feat when you consider that Darkshine and Atomic Samurai were capable of damaging Psycho Orochi, a being that scales to multi-continental at the very least. This scaling also makes sense given that the databook explicitly states that Carnage Kabuto possesses incomparably greater physical strength than Vaccine Man. Monsters like Goketsu also have a strong case of being country level, as during his fight with Saitama, the shockwaves he produced were powerful enough to disturb the clouds, generating an estimated 14 tertons of TNT. This actually lines up perfectly with Koketsu's lore, which when you use the chain of scaling and multiple indications, his strength should be surpassing the meteor that was stated to be capable of destroying a countryside city. An homeless emperor in terms of destructive capability should logically possess enough power to at least harm Koketsu. This is according to Gero, as she states that a team that consists of him and Black S could defeat anyone. Platinum S should be on a similar tier if not higher, as after all, Garu defeats Platinum S and then immediately goes on to battle a multi-continental being. It just wouldn't make any sense for Garu to jump from being below country level to one-shotting a multi-continental plus monster. Now when it comes to speed in One Punch Man, several important points needs to be addressed. The first thing that comes to mind is Awakened Cockroach's statement about being able to dodge a light speed attack using precognition. The reason he even brings up the speed of light is because he was taunting Genos to use lasers, which strongly implies that lasers in the One Punch Man verse are indeed treated as light speed attacks. This is relevant because Genos himself was able to dodge G4 lasers multiple times, which explicitly have the properties of light. Not to mention that he used the fact that these lasers are light to defeat G4. Now going back to Awakened Cockroach, despite losing his legs, he was still fast enough to escape from Genos, and later on when Genos sensed a high-speed frequency approaching him, his first assumption was that it could be Awakened Cockroach returning. This certainly matters because his precognition abilities, something that operates on a light speed reaction level, failed to warn him about Orochi's horn attack, which certainly implies that Orochi's attack was simply too fast for his senses to register. At that point in the story, Garu, who was still considered low to possibly mid-tier Kadri level, was able to dodge multiple attacks of this caliber, and this strongly suggests that most Kadri level monsters are capable of operating at similar or higher speed ranges. With that being said, there are some statements that people deem to be a bit controversial. For example, Watchdog Man is stated to move around 250 km per hour when chasing monsters, and Neo Hero Axel was recently shown reaching above 350 km per hour. These are clearly travel speed feats, which are fundamentally different from combat and reaction speed. This distinction is even supported by the data book. When it mentions Lightning Max and Lightning Genji having access to the speed of lightning, it's clearly referring to how fast their attacks are, not exactly how fast they can physically run. So when it comes to the monsters, I wouldn't necessarily argue that most demon level monsters scale to Awakened Cockroach's speed, but dragon level monsters should be far above that threshold. And with all of this being said, how would these monsters perform against a threat on the level of Ryume Sukuna? Now, when it comes to Dabura going up against demon level threats, I don't see him finding any trouble in dealing with Season 1's monsters. Mosquito Girl, Beast King, and the Deep Sea King, all of them would be defeated by Dabura as he straight up has better scaling. Absolutely none of these monsters has any arguments of them being on the percentage of the speed of light. The best you can really give them is massively hypersonic plus speeds for possibly scaling above Genji at max, and for relying on a calc of the Deep Sea King moving so fast the raindrops look frozen. Dabura's attacks, on the other hand, operate on that light speed spectrum, and even his movements far surpasses these monsters. He also has comparable if not higher attack potency even when talking about the first meta. So the point is, Deep Sea King level combatants are definitely not defeating Dabura, as a bunch of light attacks would be able to do the job. When we talk about Season 2's demons, specifically Awakened Cockroach and above, according to the aforementioned monster, he would be able to dodge Dabura's attacks that moves at the speed of light. He would be able to sense it before it happens and quickly move out of the way. Awakened Cockroach is a monster that heavily relies on speed, and we haven't seen enough from him to suggest he would be strong in the durability department, except for possibly tanking the initial heat from Genos' Incinerate. If that's the case, then he would be able to press Dabura and possibly even defeat him. This is obviously only when considering the first meta of strength of Dabura being only city level would make him a contender with high demon level monsters, nothing more, nothing less. So against awakened cockroach and above, his chances would diminish significantly. He also sadly does not have a domain expansion that would allow him to defeat monsters slightly above his pay grade, and if he attains it in the next chapters, this would be a different conversation. However, if we take the second meta being relative to a Gojo that can power up an entire nation and say that Dabura is an island level character, then he would be able to keep climbing the ladder and defeat every single demon in the story. It would also be possible for him to defeat some dragon level monsters that doesn't have any type of chain scaling. Vaccine Man and Beefcake being city plus to mountain level would still make them inferior to Dabura's island level destructiveness. I would also see him defeat his fellow alien Melzagard, as the latter doesn't have any good durability. Multiple island level attacks would be able to cripple Melzagard and destroy all of his marbles. However, anything above this would straight up be an overkill. Carnage Kabuto and Furrier Ugly are island level combatants with similar if not higher speeds than Dabura's, and frankly speaking, getting beaten by Mahoraga is far better than having to deal with Carnage mode Kabuto. The big problem Dabura is going to have to face is that even if he approaches the 100% speed of light, the story indicates that it would bring physical complications. He'll have to use reverse curse technique every time to regenerate from attaining that speed. When on the other hand, One Punch Man monsters doesn't really have to deal with these complications. Surely they wouldn't be able to travel on that speed, but they still would be able to react to it. And even if they don't, these attacks can be tanked easily by any monster above Carnage Kabuto. However, I can still see Dabura deleting large numbers of black SS cells and could defeat someone like Homeless Emperor with area of effect attacks. But if Homeless Emperor decides to attack first, the amount of damage he can cause when using his spherical beams is something far above anything we've seen on Jujutsu Kaisen. So to sum up this video, Dabura on the first meta would be a high demon. He does have the speed and the strength to compete with most of them, but wouldn't scratch the dragon level threats. However, if we go by the second meta, even when having the necessary attack potency to be above a lot of dragons, his speed isn't really that impressive in the One Punch Man verse. He would obviously be a nightmare to a lot of dragons. For example, Kyoryu Gunshoop has been stated to attack at near light speed, so maybe they're going to be relative in that regard. But when heavy hitters like Goketsu, Rover, Galewind and Hellfire Flame join the battle, Dabura would not have the speed nor the attack potency to defeat any of them. So for now, 20 chapters in Modulo, Dabura is a low dragon.